Cory Hardin, I'm so glad you've joined me here on the podcast this afternoon because you will continue the conversation I love having about the difference between improvisation and acting, both for performers and the creation of narrative. I know improvisers are always setting out, long form improvisers are always setting out to create a long narrative, either in a sketch or in a play. How does improv the play make that better?
That's it's just such a big question. I would normally hesitate by saying anything that narrative happens within improv. It's just through the virtue of theater magic that a narrative emerges. Usually, what we do, especially at the IO Theater, is we do the herald, and the herald is a form within improv that's supposed to mimic a three-act structure of a play. And you're not encouraged to develop a story, but you're encouraged to like revisit threads, perhaps a tangential character or a character that has evolved beyond a point where you've created them in, like, we call it the first beat of a herald. And the audience then sort of makes up a narrative in their heads, or we just find something through the virtue of theater magic. And that's kind of the beauty of improv, where narrative isn't something that you're totally focused on, but it is something that happens. Like, what's the logical conclusion of this character's life? Or how can I push this forward even more? With improv, the play, it's even more difficult because, you know, the conceit of the show is that one actor has his or her lines memorized or prepared, and then an improviser joins them, and you don't really know what's going to happen, but it's always beautiful and magical. We use that as a way to inspire scenes, and then sometimes we come full circle, and sometimes we don't. But it's always fun. So that's a roundabout way for me to answer your question.
Well, and I love that you challenged the premise of the question, but also, yeah, I think that's a really important distinction, that narrative emerges and emerges and is created in this sort of shared understanding that the audience and the performers have. And that's always been my failure as an improviser. I mean, as my wife Dee Ryan will and has told people, I'm not an improviser. I'm an ad-libber. And my problem when I'm improvising, because I haven't done it enough, is that I'm always in my head. I'm always
Mm.
trying to play right. I'm always going, oh, what could, if I did this, then this could lead to this and this and this, instead of just being present, which is what improvisers need to be. So clearly I need to either never improvise again or improvise a lot more.
Yeah, and then try to get to a spot where you're not thinking. It's a difficult spot to get to, but one of my favorite improvisers and people in this world, his name is Lucas. He is in Improv the Play. He is also on one of the house team that I'm on at IO. And I think he's one of my favorite improvisers. But we had a sequence in rehearsal one day where we had like a natural conclusion of things, and I did something that I probably wouldn't have done if I were thinking, but just came naturally out of me. And a few days later, he was like, "Man, I feel like you've been cooking lately, like that thing you did in rehearsal." And I was like, "I wasn't thinking when I was doing that." And he goes, "That's kind of where you got to be. You got to just activate the play part of your brain. This part of your brain, the prefrontal cortex, isn't as engaged. It should be the mid or the back brain where you're playing and you're not thinking."
Well, and that's the other thing too that emerges in this particular form. I read my half of a scene from Russ Lees's play Nixon's Nixon, and I stayed on script, and your improviser company member Marino,
Mm-hmm.
right? Marino,
Yep,
yeah.
that's his name.
Um, improvise the other half of the scene, but I had to use the lines that Russ had written. And so this new reality, this new narrative emerges using a combination of scripted lines and improvised moments. And it's a really fun and accomplished way of doing it. Is this a form that you invented, or you have taken it from others and made it into this event?
Yeah, this form has existed for a while, or this game rather. It's called the Actor's Nightmare. And the way that the show emerged was that Matt Walsh, who is I think, an Upright Citizens Brigade ensemble member, he's been on Veep. He's a very well-known person in the comedy sphere. He
He's
came
been
to
on this
I.
podcast, in fact.
Has he really?
He
Oh
has indeed.
wow, well, that's very cool. Um, he came to IO last year and suggested to the artistic director that we ought to do a show very much like a show they do at UCB called Gravid Water. Now, Gravid Water is an entire night of two-person scenes that they've booked actors and improvisers for. So, like, they'll have a 5-minute two-person scene where it's the same thing, actor and improviser. That's done, a new scene. Whereas we're a little bit different, where we have an actor and an improviser. Then once that's done, we use that as a way to generate long-form improv for about 15, 20 minutes. Then another actor and improviser, and then more long-form improv, and then the show's over. Because that's IO's brand. That's what we do. We show that improv is an art form in and of itself. James Dugan is the director of this show. I am the producer, but we've also gone back and forth with creative input on the show. And it very much follows like a herald structure, or just like very, very easy to follow forms within improv. We have recently sort of tinkered with the show where we are applying much more of a deliberate form on top of it. So it's constantly evolving and shaping and changing as we find out more. It feels like we're in uncharted territory a little bit, because I don't know that there's another show that exists like this one. So we're trying to find best practices. Like, usually what happens is with that two-person actor improviser scene, we try not to have a third improviser come in, although it does happen on very specific instances. But we're still coming up with the rules, quote unquote, on how to do this thing.
Right. And part of that is that these are discoveries made in performance too. And that's the beauty of it. It's not top down. We're not imposing rules. We're discovering, as you say, best practices.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've had rehearsals since last May where we brought an actor in who prepared a scene. And we've had several rehearsals to try to figure out what that looks like, what that feels like. We've been working on chemistry within the ensemble itself. But 99.9% of the time, and this has been the case from the beginning, the acting scenes just work. Like, it's so strange how this theater magic just happens. And then that puts the improvisers in the space of like, okay, this thing always works. Now we have to figure out how to make our improvisation sections work, which is always the challenge.
Well, and what was fun too about the scene that I did, I was playing Richard Nixon in the very first scene of Nixon's Nixon, and my scripted scene partner is Henry Kissinger. And Marino wasn't playing Henry Kissinger, and I can't remember who he was playing, but he invented an offstage character of a son who was a bartender, which created a different life and a different reality. And it gave me, playing Nixon and sticking to those lines, something to also refer to. So I was improvising choices based on what I was given in the scene, but with the restriction that I must stick to the script. It was fascinating. It was, and I guess it went well enough because I thought the scene was going to end, I don't know, sort of at the bottom of this third page, and then we went on for another couple of pages. So I guess it was going okay? Question mark.
It was actually, that show is one of my favorites that we've done in a while, for that reason, and also the improv set that followed too was so much fun. How much of your interpretation of the scene, or the choices that you would normally make, what percentage did they change? And because I usually tell people it's like contentless scenes. I don't know if you know what those are.
Not in the way you're talking about it.
In acting school, it's often in like acting one or acting two, they'll give you scenes that's like character A, character B, and
Neutral scenes. I've heard of
they're like,
neutral
yeah,
scenes. Yeah.
yeah. And they're pretty neutral lines, but you change your interpretation of what it could be. Was that your experience?
A little bit, yeah. I mean, that was it was fun how such a very specific text can change meaning based on what the actors are bringing to it, which is, of course, the thing I love about acting generally and directing is that we're constantly replacing actors in the Reduced Shakespeare Company, and even though they're sticking to the script and sticking to the directed moments and peaks and valleys, every actor is different and every actor brings something else, and so there becomes a new energy, and because of an individual energy the dynamic amongst the performers changes as well.
Yeah, and one of my favorite actors, his name is Mark Rylance. He says that theater should feel like you're going to a restaurant and you're getting a brand new dish. It's the same dish, but it's a new dish. You don't go to a restaurant and get the leftovers. And so every person's got their own take on it. And I was always taught that, like, you should come, because I'm traditionally an actor, you should bring whatever you've got that day to the thing. And, like, your general track doesn't change, but there's something about you that changes. And I remember working with somebody at a professional theater early on in my career who was like, no, it's got to be the same every single night. And I thought, yeah, no, that's not the point here, man. It's a conversation. You're doing the same thing, but you're going about it in almost a different way. It's difficult to explain.
No, I get it. I get it. And God, how cool would it be if I could now say Mark Rylance has been on this podcast?
That would be very cool. I would feel very honored to be on a podcast that Mark Rylance.
So would I. No, I know it's. Talk to me a little bit about that difference between being an actor and an improviser. Again, because this fascinates me. Because I'm on stage and I'm doing that exact thing that you're talking about, which is I'm bringing my full self to scripted lines, and my skill, to the degree that I have a skill, is making scripted lines sound like I'm improvising them. How does that work for you? You said you began as an actor, now you're improvising, and obviously an improviser is also acting. How does that distinction work for you?
You know, there's so many people who believe that being a good improviser is just being a good actor because you have to commit, and there's a certain level of sincerity that's important to apply. The only thing that's different is that you don't have lines, and there's like this playful possibility that's right underneath you if you're doing it right, I guess. The thing that I always say that I think that this show does is it teaches actors how important joy and play is, and it teaches improvisers how important commitment and sincerity, and to a certain degree professionalism is, and that's what I hope is the future for this show. When people, if the show is, it has a long life, I hope that people look back on it, and the people who have done it, the people who have seen it, the people who hear about it say that those are the two things that they're grateful for, that actors are taught to have joy and to have play, and that it's a play when you're doing it, and improvisers, you don't have to shy away from a sincerity, that you can still be extremely funny if you're taking something very seriously.
Yeah, we don't say I'm off to rehearse a work.
Right. I know.
Right.
I didn't do improv for like the first 10 years of my life here in Chicago. I had done improv in college, and the only time I ever set foot in IO, when I was done with college, I came to Chicago immediately. The only time I set foot in IO was to go to the casting director, Cargie Ross, when she was casting for the Chicago Fire Med, all that stuff, and the Shy as well. I never went to improv shows, and I never did improv. The pandemic happened. I lost my agent. I found myself in this moment where I was like really not having a good time with my career. and a friend of mine suggested that I start taking improv classes. I started taking improv classes, and I started having this thing come back that I had felt when I was in college learning as an actor, which is that joy and the play and the reason for doing it and the presentness. And it's changed my career in a way that I'm so grateful for. And I just had a workshop with Brittany Ward, who is a casting director, and she said, you know, I worked with you like 6 years ago at the beginning of the pandemic, and she was like, there's a difference with you now. You're more available than you were. And I do think that improv has changed my life in that way.
That's fascinating, and what a fantastic testimonial. And of course, it's why you want other actors to discover the joy that you discovered.
Yeah.
And you're right. You're 100% right. Is that it's freeing when you allow yourself. Again, as an actor, the more memorized and more rehearsed I am, the more free I feel, because I haven't improvised enough. I can get up and ad lib and bullshit all night. But in terms of being helpful to the scene and sticking in the scene, that's the stuff I need to work on. The acting stuff when I'm improvising.
Yeah, absolutely. But at the same time, I would also say to an improviser that there's something to be said for taking something just slightly more seriously. So both have, have reasons to learn from each other. And the last thing that I'll say on this point specifically, unless you want to keep going, which is that when the Chicago theater community sort of started getting really good back in the day, Sheldon Patinkin is a guy who was a part of Steppenwolf, and he was a guy who was a part of Second City, so he ran around the same circles. And there's all of these artists who were influenced by the same ethos, presentness, play, taking the thing that you're doing seriously. And for some reason, I don't think it was after Sheldon passed. I think it was before then, perhaps. But the two worlds, the theater and the improv worlds, got so separated from each other. And I think that if the two worlds can come back together, there's something really beautiful that could happen, because we need each other more than anything. It's better to be together than separate, in my opinion.
100%. And we can leave it there, because that's a great lesson and a great moral. Yeah, Sheldon was at Second City 20, 25 years before, 30 years before Steppenwolf and everybody, but he was such a formative mentor for so many artists and companies here in Chicago. Yeah, and I 100% hear what you're saying. There should be so much more crossover between the acting and the improv communities. I agree.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's the goal of the show to bring the two together more.
This podcast is a production of the Reduce Shakespeare Company, reducing expectations since 1981. Go to reduceshakespeare.com for performance dates, actor bios, email newsletters, and so much less.